pleasure to be here to talk to the Sperry Symposium about the Joseph Smith Papers and the Doctrine and Covenants. I'm going to first give a brief overview about the Joseph Smith Papers, and then I'm going to talk about some specific sections in the Doctrine and Covenants that I think we can understand better because of the work we're doing on Joseph Smith's revelations. We sing in the church that millions shall know Brother Joseph again. It is our hope at the Joseph Smith Papers that we might have a role in helping millions upon millions become better acquainted with Joseph. The goal of the Joseph Smith Papers is to publish, either in print or on our website, everything that is a Joseph Smith document. That is, documents that he wrote, dictated, or authorized, or letters and other things that were sent to him. It's a massive undertaking. On the day the church was organized, the Lord told Joseph, "Behold, a record shall be kept among you." The early saints took that commission seriously, as we'll see. So the Joseph Smith Papers is a documentary editing project sponsored by the Church History Department of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and funded in large part by the Larry and Gail Miller Family Foundation. Many of the great men and women of history have similar papers projects. Examples here. Each project aims to find the relevant records, to transcribe and verify them, and to place them in historical context. Our goal is to produce books of the highest scholarly standards and the highest church standards. In many ways, Joseph has been the target of continuous character assassination since the church began. One of the goals of the Joseph Smith Papers is to ensure that never again can a critical author write on Joseph in a credible manner without grappling and confronting with his records, with his voice, and with the scholarship surrounding those records. We thus hope to influence the understanding of Joseph both through our own books and by influencing other books written on him. So we do this documentary editing to make the primary historical sources easily and readily available, to provide resources for other scholars, and to preserve the manuscripts. Now, what we do in documentary editing then is we take the original documents, we collect, transcribe, annotate them. We then publish them in books and hope that in this example of the George Washington Papers, they then influence other books written on the topics. There's been a lot of books written on Joseph. All of them would have been better with more easily and readily accessible primary sources. Like I said, it's a massive undertaking. This is how our bookshelf will appear when we're done. We're about 6 volumes in right now. There's a bookmark, if you're interested, on the table as you leave, picturing our series. And what we do is we divide the documents into the different types or genres. As you can see, they're color-coded up here, and I want to briefly tell you about each of our series. We have a series that focuses on Joseph's revelations and his translations. Here we have the manuscript of the Vision, Doctrine and Covenants 76, and then an image of some of the early published and manuscript revelations that I'll talk more about. So in the Revelations and Translation series, we're going to publish the earliest manuscripts of the Revelations, the Book of Mormon, the Bible Revision, and then the earliest published versions as well of the Revelations. We have a history series, which we just concluded 2 weeks ago with our second volume of the history series in print. What that is the narrative histories produced by Joseph and his associates. So histories also that he commissioned that other people would write. And it will include on our website as well the extensive manuscripts that became what we know as the published history of the church. They exist in these 6 manuscript books. Joseph started this project in 1838, 1839. It continues well into the 1850s and then is later published but there are significant differences between the manuscripts and the published version, and we call the different books A1, B1, C1, as they originally labeled them. We have a journal series that will include all diaries and journals written by Joseph Smith, or those written for him by clerks, which is mostly the case. About 1,600 pages of journals, 31 in Joseph's own hand, which are remarkable documents to get at Joseph's personality, and then another 250 pages that were dictated directly by him. Here's some images of those precious journals. Our largest series, which will be 10, 15 volumes in the end, is our document series. And what that is we take all of the letters, the minutes of meetings, the revelations, and we place them in chronological order. We introduce each document separately to place it in its historical context. Finally, we have a legal, well, not quite finally, our fifth series is our legal and business series. Joseph was involved in over 200 court cases. Imagine what that must have meant to him from 1830 to 1844, over 200 civil and criminal cases. Much of the information that we'll present in the legal series is new information, new cases that have been discovered. And finally, we have an administrative series, which will mostly be on the web, which will include minute books, letter books, and records of institutions such as the Quorum of the 12 and the Nauvoo Female Relief Society. We recently put online the Nauvoo Female Relief Society Minute Book, just a tremendous document, foundational document in early Mormon history. I'd encourage all of you to read it. Getting the text right is the first responsibility of a documentary editor. It's not always easy. Let me give you two quick examples, then we'll get on to the main topic. This is from the printed history of the church. Joseph presumably wrote, "On my return home, I found my wife Emma sick. She was delivered of a son which did not survive its birth." If we go back to the manuscript, it says much the same thing. On my return home, I find my wife Emma sick. So the manuscript to the printed, there's no difference. But the compilers of the manuscript history were using Joseph's journal. So let's see what the journal says. Home. Sister Emma sick. Had another Chill. Chill. She had to chill. She got better. Right? That's quite a different event than having a child who the manuscript history compilers then assumed was a son who did not survive his birth. So getting back to the original documents does tell us very important things. One more example. In 1843, Joseph was arrested in Missouri and then released. When he came home, he recounted his experience for his journal. Past readers of the very difficult handwriting have suggested that Joseph said he appeared before one spiritual-minded circuit judge and several fit men. Turns out that he actually said he appeared before one spindle-shanked circuit judge and several fat men. Kind of a different mental image of what's going on. We also have a website. I'd encourage all of you to go to the website at some point and peruse it for your interests. Everything that will appear in print will be on the website. And there will be much more, including all the annotation introductions, and everything that, and the website will contain a lot of material that will never appear in print. Each document on our website has an image of the original manuscript page, along with the transcription, along with links to any pertinent annotation. You can zoom in on the documents, get a better sense if you don't trust our transcription. And then we also have a lot of material that can help with the study of the Doctrine and Covenants, early church history chronologies, biographical directories, geographical directories, so we understand the places, glossaries, maps, and other items. The various series of the Joseph Smith papers overlap with each other somewhat. In the translations and Revelation series, we present the documents in their original format. So we present them as they were first written down or first published without contextual annotation. But in the document series, we then use the earliest manuscript of the Revelation and introduce it with historical context. One of the first volumes, actually our second imprint of the Joseph Smith Papers, was a reproduction of the Manuscript Revelation books, which you see a page of here. It reproduces in photographic and textual format 2 Manuscript Revelation books that scribes used between 1831 and 1835 to write down the Revelations. Known as the Book of Commandments and Revelations and the Book of Revelations, these books served as the basis for the earliest printed copies of the Revelations, the Book of Commandments in 1833 and the Doctrine and Covenants in 1835. While most of the Joseph Smith Papers volumes will contain only transcriptions, this volume, because of the centrality of the Revelations, has both images and transcriptions. And in the transcriptions, we color code different people's handwritings because the Revelations were edited in these Manuscript Revelation books so that you can know if the editing is being done by Joseph or one of his several associates. This volume gives unique insight into the revelatory culture of early Mormonism. The Manuscript Revelation books are particularly important since Joseph's revelations comprise most of the surviving documents that we have from the earliest years of the church, 1828 to 1831. John Whitmer began the first of the Revelation books, which we call Revelation Book 1. He called it the Book of Commandments and Revelations, about March 1831. It then contains revelations from 1831 to 1834. It was the primary source text for the Book of Commandments. In November 1831, desiring to make the Revelations more readily accessible to an expanding church membership, a church conference in Hiram, Ohio, voted to authorize the publication of the Revelations and to print 10,000 copies at a time when there's 1,500 members of the church at most. The publishing would be done in Independence, Missouri. Revelation Book 1 then was taken to Missouri so that W.W. Phelps could use it in the printing of the Book of Commandments. The printing obviously was interrupted in July 1833 because of a mob. Only a few copies of the Book of Commandments survived, and that necessitated a new publication project back in Kirtland. The most exciting thing about the book on our book on the Manuscript Revelation books is Revelation Book 1. It's been inaccessible to scholars until the last few years. The saints brought it west with them in 1847. It was then stored in the church historian's office. At some point, it became part of the papers of Joseph Fielding Smith, the church historian from 1921 through 1970. And then when he became church president, it became part of the papers of the First Presidency. The First Presidency then authorized, about 6 years ago, the publication of that book through the Joseph Smith Papers. And its publication really marks a milestone in our understanding of the Revelations. Revelation Book 2, called the Book of Revelations, or the Kirtland Revelation book, was then kept from early 1832 to late 1834. Its primary scribe was Frederick G. Williams. It was used in conjunction with Revelation Book 1 as the source text for the Doctrine and Covenants. The Manuscript Revelation books clearly indicate that Joseph and the other Latter-day Saints viewed revision of the Revelations text as a necessary and natural part of the publication process. They saw the Revelations as they did the church, living, dynamic, and subject to change based on additional revelation. During the November 1831 conference that authorized the publication of the Revelations, Joseph received a revelation that would serve as the preface to the book, section 1 that we know it as, which acknowledged that the revelations were given unto my servants in their weakness, after the manner of their language. The conference charged Joseph Smith to correct those errors or mistakes which he may discover by the Holy Spirit. The participants also discussed Joseph's imperfect language, resulting in another revelation, which challenged the wisest man to produce a revelation on par with one of Joseph's. William Mcclellan took the challenge, failed. That inspired additional confidence in Joseph's revelations. Joseph Smith and a handful of associates, including Oliver Cowdery, Sidney Rigdon, John Whitmer, and W.W. Phelps, thus edited the Revelations. They believed that God spoke to them, as Joseph said, through a crooked, broken, scattered, and imperfect revelation. Sidney Rigdon, for instance, replaced biblical language with more modern words, substituting you, your, and yours for thee, thy, and thine. John Whitmer reversed many of those changes, made some modifications of his own. Oliver Cowdery altered the revelations less frequency, but also often did so more substantively. For instance, a revelation received on January 2nd, 1831, now Doctrine and Covenants 38, verse 14, stated, "Ye are blessed, not because of your iniquity, neither your hearts of unbelief, for verily some of you are guilty before me." At this point, Oliver Cowdery inserted a clause, "But I will be merciful unto your weakness." In other revelations, Oliver Cowdery indicated that divine promises were conditional on the recipient's faithfulness. Joseph Smith also clarified passages and likely reviewed all of the changes, although the extent of his supervision is ultimately unknown. In the coming year, we're going to publish 2 other books that have a lot to do with the early revelations, the first 2 books in our Documents series. Documents Volume 1, 1828 to June 1831, and then Documents Volume 2, with documents from July 1831 to January 1833. That will cover about the first 90 sections of the Doctrine and Covenants. The intense research needed to properly place each revelation into context has yielded many new insights. I've played only the most peripheral of roles in this research, and I want to acknowledge those scholars, Michael McKay, Garrett Dirkmott, Matt Godfrey, Mark Ashurst McGee, Grant Underwood, Robert Woodford, and Bill Hartley, who have labored with these documents for many years. I will share some of their insights from specific sections of the Doctrine and Covenants. Section 19, a marvelous doctrinal section. It talks about the atonement, it talks about endless versus eternal punishment, and other things. On a practical level, its immediate significance was to command Martin Harris to not covet thine own property, but impart it freely to the printing of the Book of Mormon, and to pay the printer's debt. Section 19 has traditionally been dated to March 1830. It appears with that date in the earliest of the 2 publications, the Book of Commandments and the Book of Doctrine and Covenants. However, the editors of those publications seem to have had doubt about the date. In the Book of Commandments, they placed it in parentheses, as they did with a few other dates. In the Doctrine and Covenants, they got rid of all the parentheses except this one, indicating that they still had doubt. Revelation Book 1 tells a different story, placing this revelation among 1829 revelations and labeling it as such in the index of that book. The historical context also provides some clues in understanding this revelation. The Lord strongly chastises Martin Harris. He's told repeatedly to use his property to pay for the publication of the Book of Mormon. In June 1829, Martin Harris had negotiated along with Joseph Smith with several printers regarding the publication. They came to an agreement with E.B. Grandin of Palmyra to publish the book. John H. Gilbert, the typesetter on the Book of Mormon, said that Grandin would do nothing until the book was paid for, would not even buy the type. Grandin's brother-in-law recalled that Martin Harris became for a time in some degree staggered in his confidence, but nothing could be done in the way of printing without his aid. It seems that it's during this time that Joseph receives Section 19, urging Martin Harris to fulfill the bargain that he had with the printer. Martin did so. On August 25, 1829, he mortgages his property. Basically, all property to which he then held legal title to pay for the printing. Mortgages could be used in transactions, could be bought and sold, and Grandin sold the mortgage for cash. When Harris gave Grandin the mortgage, the printing of the Book of Mormon was paid for. E.B. Grandin had no interest in how well the book sold. He had already received his money. So it would make no sense for Martin Harris to be told by the Lord in March 1830 to pay for the Book of Mormon when the payment had already been made. Harris had no more land, and the books were rolling off the press that month. But it made a lot of sense in the summer of 1829 when Harris was hesitating on his promise to pay for the Book of Mormon. After receiving the chastisement from the Lord, Martin Harris went forward with the difficult decision to mortgage his property and pay for the book. Section 19 thus should probably be seen as a revelation in the summer of 1829, which spurred Martin, in a moment of hesitation, to mortgage his property to ensure that the Book of Mormon would be published. Let's fast forward in time to February 4, 1831. The revelation we know as Doctrine and Covenants 41 arrives right after Joseph Smith arrives in Ohio from New York. It's a great example of a revelation which lost some of its original historical context and thus has been difficult to fully understand. Joseph Smith's history, that A1, B1, C1 history, connects the revelation to the spiritual excesses of early believers in Ohio. It says, the branch of the church in this part of the Lord's vineyard were striving to do the will of God, so far as they knew it, though some strange notions and false spirits had crept in among them. That's been sort of the best historical context that people have relied on. Now listen to what Revelation Book 1 says. It first says, and remember, Revelation Book 1 is being recorded within a couple of months of the revelation. John Whitmer says it points at the office of Edward, a reference to Edward Partridge, who would be called as first bishop of the church by the revelation. Then Whitmer says, there was a man by the name of Copley in the township of Thompson who had requested Brother Joseph and Sidney to live with them, and he would furnish them houses and provisions. And then Joseph inquired of the Lord and received as follows. In other words, Lehman Copley, a converted Shaker, had offered Joseph and Sidney houses and provisions if they would live on his land in Thompson, Ohio. Sidney and Phoebe Rigdon had recently lost their home, which their Campbellite congregation in Mentor, Ohio, had built for them when he converted to Mormonism. Obviously, the Smiths were in need of a place to live as well. The revelation doesn't say much about religious excesses. It talks about the elders of the church receiving God's law, which they would 5 days later in the revelation we know as section 42, and they knew as the law. It then instructs the saints to construct a home for Joseph Smith in which to live and translate, indicating that Joseph should live in Kirtland, not Thompson. Furthermore, Sidney Rigdon should have a comfortable room to live in. Joseph and Sidney thus declined Copley's offer, but Copley soon extended the offer to other emigrating saints, those coming from Colesville, New York. This revelation is an excellent example of how using historical context can help us better understand the revelation. Otherwise, all this talk about houses in the Revelations doesn't make all that much sense. Let's go to section 49. We fast forward another few months. It's another revelation with a dating problem. In this revelation, the Lord directs Parley P. Pratt, Sidney Rigdon, and Lehman Copley to take a revelation to the Shaker community of North Union near Cleveland and call it to repentance. Shaker shared with Mormons a relatively recent origin, belief in modern prophecy, and millennialism. Soon the Mormons would experiment with their own form of communalism, which the Shakers were also known for. The three men chosen for this mission all had knowledge of and ties to the Shakers. Copley had been a Shaker. Rigdon had admired Shaker communalism and had extensive dealings with them. Parley Pratt had familial ties to the Shakers and had grown up in the shadow of their main community in New Lebanon, New York. Furthermore, Pratt had visited, along with Cowdery and a few others, the Shakers and left several copies of the Book of Mormon with them many months earlier, as part of his Lamanite mission. For Pratt, this was then a return visit to see if seeds planted earlier would now bear fruit. Unknown to him, a prominent Shaker elder, Richard McNamara, had read one of the copies of the Book of Mormon. It reminded him of the Persian tales which I used to read when a boy. Its endless genealogies and chronologies afford no light to a believer, McNamara wrote. So let's talk about the date. The Book of Commandments and the Doctrine and Covenants both say it's March 1831. However, the Shaker elder at North Union, Ashbel Kitchell, recorded a copy of the Revelation dated May 7, 1831. Revelation Book 1 also dates it as May 7, 1831, written basically at the time of the Revelation. So that confirms the date. Why should we care about the date? The Mormon delegation arrived in North Union on the evening of Saturday, May 7th. In other words, Joseph Smith must have received the revelation that morning. They must have left immediately. They didn't wait around for 2 or 3 months. They took the revelation so seriously that they went. Ashbel Kitchell recorded a lengthy account of the Mormons' visit. At a service on Sunday morning, the day after their arrival, the Mormons were given permission to read the Revelation. Behold, I say unto you that they desire to know the truth in part, but not all, for they are not right before me and must needs repent. The Revelation begins without mincing words. The Revelation targeted some of the group's most cherished practices, including celibacy, vegetarianism, and the divine role of Mother Ann Lee. To be reprimanded by outsiders within one's own house of worship would have taxed the patience of the meekest of leaders. Ashbel Kitchell was not that. He restrained himself at first to simply dismiss the revelation out of hand. I would release them in their Christ from any further burden about us and take all the responsibility on myself, he said. Sidney Rigdon requested that the members vote on the revelation. They were likewise unmoved. Rigdon then sat down. Parley Pratt, as a brash young missionary, arose and dramatically commenced shaking his coat tail, shaking the dust from his garments as a testimony against the Shakers. You filthy beast, Ashbel Kitchell shouted before Pratt was done. Dare you presume to come in here and try to imitate a man of God by shaking your filthy tail? Kind of sounds comical to us, but I'm sure it was a moment of high tension. Ashbel Kitchell then turned his rage on Copley, the traitor from the Shakers, who then sat hopelessly weeping, either in shame or disappointment of dashed hopes, while Rigdon sat by, not knowing quite what to do. Pratt left immediately and went back to Kirtland. Rigdon and Copley remained behind for a Shaker supper. The following day, Joseph Smith received another revelation which assigned Pratt another missionary companion and told him to go forth among the churches and strengthen them by the word of exhortation. But the confrontation had significant implications for the saints. Lehman Copley left the saints and returned to the Shakers. Remember, by now, the saints from Colesville, New York, are already living on his land. and he's going to take Ashbel-Kitchel and evict them within a few weeks. Section 74. A clarification of 1 Corinthians 7:14. It's a great example of how an inaccurate date can again change the context in which a revelation was received. Traditionally, the revelation is dated to January 1832 at Hiram, Ohio. However, in Revelation Book 1, recorded likely before 1832, John Whitmer dated it simply as 1830 in Wayne County, New York, where Palmyra is located. Once again, the earliest manuscript appears to be correct, with the error being introduced by the compilers of the manuscript history of the church. It is unknown when Joseph received this revelation in 1830, but it may have come about as he received a number of revelations that year about the proper form and authority of baptism. The verse that it clarified had long been used by Christian theologians as one of the key verses to justify infant baptism. Christians at the time of Joseph Smith often debated this issue. And this revelation, like the Book of Mormon, teaches that little children are saved through the atonement of Christ. So we now know that this crucial issue was addressed in the very beginning stages of the organization of the church in 1830 rather than later. Section 61. This was received on the banks of the Missouri River on August 12, 1831. 3 days earlier, Joseph Smith and a party of elders had left Independence, Missouri to return to Kirtland. The revelation focuses on the dangers of traveling by water, and then instructs the elders to continue their journey by leaving the Missouri River and traveling by land. Furthermore, it instructed that the saints should gather to Zion, or Missouri, by travel overland, not by the Missouri River. By the time of the revelation, Joseph and his companions had had some harrowing experiences on the river. As they traveled down the Missouri River, a sawyer, which is a submerged tree anchored to the bottom of the river, nearly capsized the canoe carrying Joseph and Sidney. On the instructions of Joseph Smith, the group then left the river and camped for the night. Knowing something about the Missouri River helps us understand the warnings in the Revelation. The river was only navigable 3 months in the year. According to an 1837 Missouri Gazetteer, the waters were mad. Freights and insurances and wages were higher on the Missouri than on other rivers because of this fact. Other publications note the frequent occurrence of sawyers, the most formidable dangers to navigation of the river. They caused 70% of all steamboat wrecks. These snags were the terrors of the pilots, said in early history of the river, and were perhaps one reason for John Whitmer's designation of the river as the River Destruction. Elizabeth Marsh, the wife of Thomas B. Marsh, after speaking to some of the elders who journeyed to Missouri, relayed that the river is always wily and bubbly and looks mad as if it had been cursed. Understanding the dangers of the Missouri River, which might have otherwise been used frequently in travel between Kirtland and Missouri, helps shed light on the specific warnings of the Revelation. I think it's also an example of how understanding the historical context can help us understand what is particular in a revelation, what is meant for a specific group of people at a specific time and place, and what is universal in the revelation. And clearly here I think that these warnings about river travel applied to them in their particular time and place, and not necessarily to a leisure cruise on the Mississippi. Section 66 is a really interesting revelation. We now know that it was received a few days differently than we originally thought because of Revelation Book 1. But what is significant about this is looking in early records left by William Mcclellan. William Mcclellan had first met Joseph Smith at a conference in Orange, Ohio on October 25th through 26th, at which point he had been ordained to the high priesthood. McClellan then went with Joseph to Hiram, Ohio, where he says he went before the Lord in secret and on my knees asked him to reveal the answer to 5 questions through his prophet. Like many other recent converts, McClellan then asked Joseph for a revelation, which would provide direction in his personal life. Joseph received section 66, which William McClellan said answered his questions to my full and entire satisfaction. In his journal that day, McClellan wrote that the questions had dwelt upon my mind with anxiety, yet with uncertainty, and that the Lord condescended to hear my prayer and give me a revelation of his will through his prophet or seer. McClellan's writings demonstrate that he had 5 specific questions that he wanted Joseph to answer, that he did not share the questions with Joseph, and that he believed that the revelation addressed his questions. This interaction suggests the depth of the belief of early church members in Joseph's revelatory ability. Another quick example of that belief in his ability has to do with Doctrine and Covenants 47, which called John Whitmer to keep a history of the church, to be, in essence, the church historian. John Whitmer initially hesitated when asked to keep a narrative history, as opposed to simply recording records that he had done previously. In his history, he wrote, "I would rather not do it, but observe that the will of the Lord be done. And if he desires it, I desire that he manifest it through Joseph the seer." Joseph the man had already asked John Whitmer to be church historian, but he wanted the answer through Joseph the seer. When the Lord spoke through Joseph the seer, John Whitmer accepted the calling and began to keep the church history. One final example. I hope I've convinced you that we still have a little bit to learn about the sections of the Doctrine and Covenants. 4 of the sections of the Doctrine and Covenants have to do with the united firm. In March 1832, Joseph received a revelation, now known as Section 78, which instructed that the church's mercantile and publishing efforts be organized in a firm. That revelation instructed that the firm would combine the stewardships of 9 men by a bond or everlasting covenant that cannot be broken. The 9 included the 2 bishops, 6 individuals who had been designated as stewards over the revelations, including Joseph, Sidney, Oliver Cowdery, John Whitmer, Martin Harris, and W.W. Phelps, along with the church agent in Missouri, Sidney Gilbert. Joining these several stewardships, the revelation said, into one firm allowed each of its members to have equal claims on the properties for the benefit of managing the concerns to your stewardship. The united firm operated for 2 years, managing church publications, running storehouses in Kirtland and Independence, overseeing Newell K. Whitney's Kirtland Ashery, and administering real estate in both centers of the church. 4 of the revelations in our current Doctrine and Covenants refer to the united firm. Section 78 directed its establishment. Section 82 designated who should be in the firm. Section 92 directed that Frederick G. Williams, who had recently become a member of the presidency of the high priesthood, basically a precursor to the first presidency, be made a member. And Section 104 instructed the saints to sever ties between the Kirtland and Missouri branches of the firm, and to distribute its properties in Kirtland to the individual members. The Kirtland High Council soon assumed many of the firm's operations, and it ceased operations. In the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, pseudonyms are used in the revelations for the members involved in the united firm to conceal their identities. In addition, wording was changed over time, which obscured the original instructions in the revelations. The words united firm became united order. Understanding the historical context about this united firm and understanding that these four revelations are talking about this church administrative unit help us clarify potential confusion about these revelations. For instance, if we're thinking about the communalism of Orderville, when we read these revelations, we're going to be confused with many of the instructions that are given therein. I hope these examples have demonstrated the importance of understanding the historical context of the Doctrine and Covenants. As Latter-day Saints, and particularly many of us in the room have the responsibility to teach the Doctrine and Covenants either at a university setting or in ecclesiastical and Sunday school settings. I think we can better teach the revelations if we understand as much as possible about the questions that prompted them, about the specific situations they addressed, and about the individuals involved. Understanding the historical particulars can help us understand what is general, what is universal in the revelations, and what was intended, again, for a specific individual at a particular time and place. The other conclusion that I've drawn from studying the insights drawn by the numerous scholars on the Joseph Smith papers is how much the early saints valued the revelations. This is shown in the painstaking way in which John Whitmer and others recorded the revelations into manuscript revelation books, and by the way in which other saints would record their own copies of the revelations because they were not yet in print. It's shown in the decision of the church conference to publish the revelations and to print 10,000 copies. At that conference, they declared that the revelations were worth to the church the riches of the whole earth. It's shown in the responses of the individuals to the revelations. When the Lord spoke through Joseph the seer, Martin Harris mortgaged his property to pay for the Book of Mormon. Sidney Rigdon, Lehman Copley, and Parley Pratt left immediately to take a revelation to the Shakers, which must have been a daunting task because of what the revelation said. William Mcclellan believed his private questions were answered. John Whitmer took up his pen to write church history. The elders avoided the Missouri River, and a number of men bound themselves together as a united firm. If we take these revelations as seriously as the early saints, and if we take the principle of revelation as seriously as well, I believe we too can say that they are worth to the church the riches of the whole earth. Got a couple of minutes. I'd be happy to take a few questions. I know I'm standing between many of you and lunch since the conference has been continuous, but I'd be happy to answer questions for the next 8-10 minutes or so, if there are any. Please.
What has been the response of outside scholars?
The reviews have been overwhelmingly positive. The project has received the approval of sort of the national bodies that govern documentary editing. And really within the scholarly community, they're recognized as meeting sort of the highest standards of that craft. And you'll notice oftentimes church members who read the Joseph Smith papers need to also keep in mind that our audience needs to be to outside scholars as well, right? And so that means writing about Joseph in the mode of the academy, right? Writing in sort of a dispassionate, neutral type mode, analyzing the documents for what they are. Yeah, please.
How do you project how many books are printed? And will there only be one, or if there's more requests for it, will there be another printing?
Of the Joseph Smith papers?
Yeah, of all of them.
So she asked, how do we know, how can we project out how many books will be printed? We've got a pretty good sense on the body materials, and so we've just had to make kind of our calculations of how much material there is out there and how much it's going to take to print. Since we're 6 books in, we have a fairly decent sense of that. And then does that answer your question?
No.
Oh, okay.
We bought some.
Yeah.
I've noticed there are still some available from the first one.
Yes.
And they are now less money than what I paid.
Well, I encourage everyone to buy them not on sale, but go ahead.
You can't wait for that. So my question
Yeah.
is, if I don't have enough money right now, I still need
Yeah.
the last 2 historical ones.
Okay.
If I wait till next month, I'll be still available. Something like that.
Yeah, so we do anticipate that the papers will remain in print, that you're going to be able to buy the papers 10 years from now. I mean, we don't expect to, we do. Because of changes in printing technology and other things, it's much easier to keep a book in print. And so her question was basically, how do I know, if I can't buy the books right now, am I going to be able to buy them later? Our goal is to publish 2 of these books a year, and they are expensive books, in part because they're intended to sit on library shelves for a long, long time. They have to be high quality and that sort of thing. The books in no way pay for the project, and so we realize that they are expensive books. And one of the things we're trying to do because of that is the website. Though, of course, we encourage everyone to buy the books. Please. We'll get you next. So, like any book, we'll have mistakes, and so is that your? So we publish. Yeah. So we would correct the mistakes on the website and then publish on our website a list of anything that we have found that would be mistaken in earlier volumes. Yeah. Great question. Please. So that's a great question. So a lot of the Joseph Smith works have appeared in print in some form or another. I don't have a percentage off the top of my head. It's a relatively significant. I mean there are certainly many documents that we're publishing that have never appeared in print, and then I think that we're also trying to add value to those documents that have appeared in print by correcting transcription errors that have survived in the past, or by adding the sort of historical contextual scholarship. So it's a somewhat significant percentage, but it is true that the majority of the papers have appeared in print in some form or another throughout the years. Yeah, please. So the question is, certainly we're refining some of the dating and other things that would affect the current head notes to the Doctrine and Covenants. I think I would just say on that throughout time the church has revised those head notes. So the head notes are first included in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, substantially changed by Orson Pratt in 1876, substantially changed in 1921, substantially changed in 1981 to keep pace with sort of new knowledge about the revelations and things like that. So certainly there's historic precedence for that sort of a thing. Great. Please. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so your question is how you would use something like the Joseph Smith papers kind of on a practical level. I do think that this kind of insight into the Revelations is one of those real core places, right? I think there's a power in not just the Revelations, but in any of the early documents in confronting them in kind of their manuscript form like you could on the website, right? And reading them as they're originally inscribed. But I would think that we would hope that church members would use the scholarship on the Revelations and their study of the Doctrine and Covenants, and would find much of value throughout the rest of the papers. I'll say, for instance, we published these 2 volumes of history this year. The first volume is the histories that Joseph wrote, or that he was very directly involved with. So he wrote a personal history in 1832. He wrote a history in 1838 that we know as Joseph Smith I. He wrote the Wentworth Letter and other histories about his life. And I think for many members of the church, that will be one of the most accessible things that we do, because they're narrative histories, right? It's Joseph telling the story, the first vision, 4 or 5 different times, right? And the different insights we can gain from that. So I don't know if that's totally helpful. Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think so. I think it's a small subset of people that will want to read these cover to cover, end of the first, But it's clearly they are meant as reference material, both for church members and outside scholars, right? So studying a particular topic to go there. Maybe one more question. We'll come over here, please.
I have a question about the ambiguity of section 61.
Okay.
Talked about the waters being dangerous and what that was about. Excuse my voice. But in verse 3, before they first say the waters are dangerous, the Lord says, why are they going swiftly on the waters when there are people on both sides swiftly and unbelief?
Yeah.
Suggesting get off the water.
Yeah.
People there to teach. Then it goes on about the water, but then in verse 22, it says it mattereth not to me whether you go on the land or on the water.
Yeah.
In verse 28, he says, the Spirit will tell you whether to go on the land or on the water. I don't care.
Yeah.
So in talking about the waters and the fighting the danger, is there an attempt to supersede the danger? And it can seem to me the most important part is there's people on both sides.
Yeah, no, that I think that's a really important point. Thanks for the question. And I think there is something about the dangers of the water, though. If you look in sort of those early sources, what people are talking about that revelation, that they did tend to focus on that, this idea of the river destruction, this idea of W.W. Phelps later records a vision, which he says, he sees the destroyer riding upon the waters and that sort of thing. So certainly all of these revelations that I've talked about today are much more complex and intricate than the 5 minutes I gave them. And I think there is definitely ambiguity there about that question, about exactly the reasons why. I think those dangers of the river factors into it, but then so does what you're saying.
Well, discernment is harder to come by than to just say the waters are dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, we will. I think is there a closing prayer? Okay. Well, thank you very much.